Good evening, everyone. Tonight we'll be talking about the components of the heart and the cardiovascular system and the different types of structures in the circulatory system, including arteries and veins, the chambers of the heart, and the basics on checking a pulse and checking your heart rate. So tonight's learning objectives will be, by the end of this lesson, students will be able to identify the components of the cardiovascular system, including the heart and the circulatory system, being able to calculate their heart rate or pulse rate after the instructions taught in class, and being able to list and explain the components of the cardiovascular system by creating an online poster in class. The state standards that we'll be covering are the PE Physical Education Standards, so California Education Code 2.2, which is participate in enjoyable and challenging physical activities that develop and maintain the 5 components of physical fitness. So like before, this is the 5th component of the 5 components of fitness, so this is the last unit before your final. And the second state standard is 2.3, which is meet health-related physical fitness standards established by scientifically based health-related fitness assessments. So moving to the first component, which is the heart. So the heart is it's a very, very complex structure, but kind of how we're going over it, I've tried to make it as basic as possible. So the heart is composed of 4 different chambers, which are the right atrium, which is located here. So anatomically, when you look at the heart diagram, everything is flip-flopped. So the right side here, and then this is the left side. So the left side is noticeably different than larger than the right side, because the left side has to work harder to actually pump the blood throughout the body, whereas the right side of the heart only has to work to move the blood into the lungs. So this is the right atrium here. This is the right ventricle here. This is the left atrium here. And this is the left ventricle here. And notice in this little picture here, here's the left ventricle. It's kind of got some diagrams. The rest of these are, tabs you are feel free to look at and learn, but you are not required to learn them for class. It's just a little too complex. So we're going to start off with the basics. So the right atrium, like I mentioned, pumps the blood into the right ventricle. So when the blood comes in here through one of the veins in the body, which is in this instance is the superior vena cava. So the blood comes in here, and this is the right atrium. And the right atrium moves the blood counterclockwise into the right ventricle, which is this section of the heart here. The right ventricle pumps the blood to the lungs. So after that, the blood flow goes into the pulmonary artery and goes into the lungs. And the blood enters the lungs through the left, starting over. The blood from the lungs, after that, returns through the left atrium here. So here's the left atrium. So all the oxygenated blood enters the left atrium here. And then after the left atrium, the blood will enter the left ventricle, which is here. And after the left ventricle, it will enter the body through the aorta and get passed through the rest of the body. Okay, so where does the blood go? So when the blood leaves the heart and flows to the body through the arteries. So the next structure that you'll see is a structure of the circulatory system. So arteries are colored in red and the veins are colored in blue. So it's very easy. So just think of when blood leaves the heart, it goes through the arteries. So arteries away. So when the blood leaves the heart, it goes through the arteries. And when the blood returns to the heart, the blood returns through the veins. So blood moves through the body in a circular manner, so almost, completely clockwise. So I'm going to go here to this next diagram. So here, these are all of the arteries, and these are all of the veins in a nutshell. There's a lot more than just 4 of them, but this is just basic. So this is the left ventricle, here. So when the blood leaves the left ventricle, it goes through the artery here and passes through the body, and then when all of the oxygenated blood gets used, the deoxygenated blood goes through the veins and goes back up here into the right atrium. And the process kind of starts all over. So then it goes from the right atrium to the right ventricle, and then from the right ventricle into the lungs here, and then back from the lungs into the left atrium, and then into the left ventricle, and then to the body once again through the arteries. So moving on to heart rate. So what exactly is a heart rate or a pulse rate? So heart rate is the amount of times your heart beats or contracts when it pushes the blood through your body. So when you are sleeping or swimming or you have a headache and you kind of feel that throbbing or pulsating feeling in your body, that's actually your heart beating. So there's different ways to check your heart rate or your pulse rate. Most commonly, the common ways, which we'll go over today, are checking it through by checking your pulse through your wrist or by your neck. So the harder your body works, the faster your heart beats, which is true. So when you run and when you feel really out of breath and you can hear your heart pounding in your chest, that's because your heart was working extra hard to get all of that oxygenated blood to where it needs to go to make you be able to run as fast as you're running or to kind of physically strain yourself. So ultimately, the harder your body works, the faster your heart rate increases, and therefore you have a faster heart rate. So in the next class, we'll determine whether your heart rate is within the normal age range for your age group. So typically for adults, to have a normal resting heart rate, which we'll go over in the next class, is about 60 to 100 beats a minute. So when you're sitting down in classroom doing your homework, your heart rate should be about between 60 and 100 typically, but we'll talk about that next week. So as I mentioned earlier, checking a heart rate, it's a little different. It's a little tricky for some people when you've never really done it before. So there's two places that are the easiest to check. So that's the radial pulse, which is here on your wrist. So your radial artery is on, so in this diagram here, this is your thumb and this is your wrist. Your radial artery is on your wrist on the thumb side. So if you kind of draw a line straight from your thumb all the way down and press right about here, kind of where the start of your wrist and your hand meet. You should just press down and you should be able to kind of feel it in your index finger and your middle finger, a little tiny beat. That's your heart rate. Or you can check your carotid artery, or the big artery in your neck, and that's by placing two fingers right below your jawline. You should feel it when you check. Okay. So I've attached a link here on YouTube, kind of how to check a radial pulse. This is just for checking the pulse on your wrist to see if you have any questions, or if you just can't quite get it, or you want some more information. This is an easy link to kind of check and look and see if you're doing it right, or if you have any questions. They also have video links for checking a carotid pulse, but I wanted to start with the basics and start with a radial pulse before we move on to the more advanced stuff. So for your assessment today, before you leave, I want you guys to click on this link or type it in on your phones, and I want you to list in the poll, there's a question that's listing the 4 components of the heart. So I want you to you can feel free to review the PowerPoint, but I want you to list the 4 components of the heart. What I said is that the arteries, veins, the ventricle is the atrium, whatever I said today in class. I want you to list your opinion and your ideas of what you think the 4 components of the heart are. And this is an individual assignment, so this is not a group assignment. You have to do this by yourself. Okay, so now I'm going to briefly talk about your in-class activity really fast. So I really want you guys to get a handle on how to check a heart rate and check your pulse. So I want you to get into groups of 2 to 3, depends. Depending on how you want to do this is flexible. I just want you to have at least one other person you can practice with. So pull out a cell phone or a watch. I need something that you can track time with. So each person in your group, you'll be checking your own pulse. So you are the only person touching your body. You will not be touching anyone else. You're not touching anyone else's wrist or neck. You're only touching your own. So make sure that you guys know that you guys are not touching anyone else, okay? So when you start the activity, first find a pulse. You can either use your wrist, so you check your radial pulse, or you can check your carotid pulse on your neck. It's up to you, whichever one you feel more comfortable with. So so what I want you to do is I want you to count the number of beats, or the number of times you kind of feel that bump, for 30 seconds. So when you get a really good feel of where your pulse is, and you have a really strong, you can feel it really well, have your partner start the clock. So from 0, when they say 0, when they start the clock, start counting, and they'll tell you to stop counting when you hit 30 seconds. So after 30 seconds, record the number that you stopped on. So for example, if you counted 20 beats in 30 seconds, you write 20 down on your piece of paper. Next, take the number of beats that you caught, so for example 20, and multiply that number by 2 because there's 60 seconds in a minute, so 30 seconds is half a minute. So 20 times 2 would be 40. So in my example here, I put 30 beats in 30 seconds, so 30 times 2 is 60 beats per minute. And then switch the roles. So after you get your number, record it on a piece of paper. Remember that it's whatever number you got in 30 seconds multiplied by 2, and that's your heart rate in 1 minute. So 60 beats per minute. So then switch with your partner. So your partner will count his heart rate. You'll be keeping the time for them. And then when he or she records their results, you guys can compare and see kind of how different your heart rates are and how different your bodies may be working, depending on how active you are in class or not. And for your out-of-class activity today, for homework, I want you guys to go to Poster on My Wall, and I want you to create a poster about the circulatory system. So that can be any of the components that I talked about today in class. That can be the components of the heart, like the atrium, ventricles. Okay, you can go in as in-depth as you want to. I'm kind of giving you free reign, but just make sure that it's academic. You guys can talk about blood flow, so kind of arteries and veins, or how it works in the body. Blood flow throughout the body, such as the blood starting in the arteries and kind of working its way through the veins and how that works. Or you can do a poster on how to check a pulse. What I really want you to get out of this assignment is I want it to be creative, short, and individual. So I've also attached the rubric online to show you kind of how I'll be grading your posters, and I've also attached an example. So on the PowerPoint that I've attached, there's an example of kind of what I'm looking for. So feel free to check that out and let me know. If you guys have any questions, feel free to email me. So here is an example of kind of the poster that I created. I did mine on the components of the heart. So I just found a picture on the internet of what the heart looked like chopped up, and then I, put in arrows. This is the right atrium, the right ventricle, left atrium, etc. Going back to the criteria. But basically I want you guys to be individualistic and creative, and I'm giving you free reign of any of the topics that I discussed in this short lesson. So if you, again, I'm going to mention it, if you have any questions, feel free to email me, and I will see you all in class. Have a good night.